The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Diner buzzed like tired insects against the grey October sky. Rain streaked the windows, creating rivers of light that danced across worn vinyl booths and checkered linoleum floors. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint scent of disappointment that seemed to permeate small-town establishments like this one. Billy Joel pushed through the glass door, shaking droplets from his leather jacket. At 68, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned to navigate the world without drawing attention to himself. His graying hair was tucked under a baseball cap, and wire-rimmed glasses obscured eyes that had seen too much of both triumph and heartbreak. The diner was nearly empty, except for a cluster of construction workers at the counter, their hard hats stacked like monuments to honest labor. In the corner booth, an elderly man sat alone, methodically working through a piece of apple pie while staring out at the rain. The soft murmur of conversation mixed with the distant sound of traffic on Route 9, creating the kind of ambient symphony that had always spoken to Billy's musical soul. "Sit anywhere you'd like, honey." The voice belonged to a woman in her early 50s, her graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the standard diner uniform, a pale blue dress with rose embroidered on the pocket in faded red thread. Her face bore the kind of weariness that comes not from a single tragedy, but from the accumulated weight of small disappointments and deferred dreams. Billy chose a booth near the window where he could watch the rain and remain relatively unnoticed. Rose approached with a coffee pot and a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring before he could respond. Her movements were economical, practiced, the result of countless shifts, serving strangers who rarely saw her as anything more than a vessel for their caffeine needs. "Thank you." Billy's voice was soft, respectful. He had learned long ago that kindness was often the rarest commodity in places like this. As Rose filled his cup, Billy noticed her hands. They were workers' hands, calloused from years of carrying heavy trays and scrubbing tables. But there was something else. Her fingers moved with a subtle grace, the way musicians' fingers do, even when they're not playing. It was barely perceptible, but Billy had spent his entire life around music, and he recognized the telltale signs. "Menus right there," Rose said, nodding toward the laminated card wedged between the salt shaker and a small plastic container of artificial sweetener. "Today's special is meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Cook makes it with his grandmother's recipe." "Sounds perfect," Billy replied, though he barely glanced at the menu. He was more interested in watching Rose work, noting the quiet dignity with which she moved between tables, despite the obvious indifference of most patrons. At the counter, one of the construction workers was becoming increasingly loud and demanding. "This coffee tastes like dishwater," he complained, his voice carrying the aggressive tone of someone looking for a target for his frustrations. "And where's my eggs? I ordered them 20 minutes ago." Rose approached the man with the same professional smile she had shown Billy. "I'll check with the kitchen right away, sir. Sometimes we get backed up during lunch rush." "Lunch rush?" The man gestured around the nearly empty diner. "What lunch rush? This place is deader than my ex-wife's cooking." His companions laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Billy watched as Rose's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. She maintained her composure, but he could see the hurt flickering behind her eyes. "I'll get your order right out," she said quietly, turning back toward the kitchen. "You do that, sweetheart," the man called after her, his voice dripping with condescension. "And maybe put a little hustle in it this time." Billy felt his jaw tighten. He had witnessed countless interactions like this over the years, people in service positions being treated as less than human by customers who seemed to forget that respect was a basic human courtesy. It was one of the reasons he often traveled incognito, choosing to observe rather than perform, to listen rather than be heard. Rose returned with the man's eggs, setting the plate down gently despite the treatment she had received. "Anything else I can get for you?" The construction worker poked at his eggs with obvious displeasure. "These are overcooked, and the toast is cold." Billy could see Rose's hands trembling slightly as she reached for the plate. "I'll have the kitchen make you fresh ones right away." "Forget it," the man said, pushing the plate away dramatically. "This whole place is a dump. Come on, guys, let's get out of here and find somewhere that knows how to run a restaurant." As the men left, their voices continued to carry back through the thin walls, making crude jokes and disparaging comments about the service. Rose stood at the counter for a long moment, her back to the dining room, her shoulders rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. Billy waited until she had composed herself before calling out softly, "Excuse me, Rose." She turned, that professional smile automatically returning to her face. "Yes? How's your coffee? Ready for that meatloaf?" "The coffee's perfect," Billy said. "But I was wondering, would it be all right if I asked you something?" Rose approached his table cautiously. Years of working in places like this had taught her to be wary of customers who wanted to ask her something. Too often it led to uncomfortable propositions or inappropriate comments. "What would you like to know?" Billy gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you mind sitting for a moment? You look like you could use a break." Rose glanced around the nearly empty diner, then back at Billy. Something in his manner, the genuine kindness in his voice, the respectful way he had phrased the request, made her decide to trust him. She slid into the booth across from him, her hands folded carefully on the table. "I don't want to pry," Billy began, "but I noticed the way you move your hands. Do you play music?" The question caught Rose off guard. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since he had entered the diner, Billy saw something other than weariness in her expression. There was surprise, and beneath it, a flicker of something that might have been longing. How did you—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. I used to. A long time ago." "What did you play?" Rose looked down at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Piano mainly, a little guitar, but that was before." "Before what?" The question hung in the air between them. Billy could see Rose wrestling with herself, torn between the natural caution of someone who had learned not to share too much with strangers and something deeper, a need to finally voice the dreams she had buried so long ago. "Before life happened," she said finally. "Before I realized that dreams don't pay the bills or put food on the table for your kids." Billy nodded slowly. He had heard variations of this story countless times. Talented people whose circumstances had forced them to set aside their artistic aspirations in favor of survival. It never stopped breaking his heart. "Do you still play at all?" Rose shook her head. "Haven't touched a piano in probably 15 years. Don't even own one anymore. Had to sell it when—" She trailed off, then seemed to catch herself. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You came here for lunch, not to hear about my sob story." "Actually," Billy said gently, "I came here because I was driving through town and saw this place. But now I'm here because I'm interested in your story, if you don't mind sharing it." There was something in his tone that invited confidence. Rose found herself looking more closely at this soft-spoken stranger with the kind eyes. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place what it was. Perhaps it was simply that he was treating her like a human being rather than just a waitress, something that had become increasingly rare in her experience. "I grew up in a musical family," Rose began, her voice taking on a distant quality as she reached back into her memories. "My father played jazz piano at the hotel downtown. This was back when Millbrook actually had a decent hotel. My mother sang in the church choir. They met at a dance in 1960, and my father always said it was my mother's voice that made him fall in love." She paused, a genuine smile crossing her face for the first time since Billy had arrived. "They taught me to play when I was 6. Said music was the one thing in life that could never be taken away from you, no matter what else happened." They sound like wise people. They were. Rose's expression grew wistful. "I was pretty good too. Won some competitions in high school, got a scholarship to study music at the State University. I was going to be a composer, write songs that would mean something to people." Billy leaned forward slightly, drawn into her story. "What happened?" Rose's fingers began moving unconsciously on the table as if playing an invisible keyboard. Billy recognized the motion, muscle memory that never truly fades, no matter how long it's been dormant. I met David my sophomore year. He was studying business, had all these plans for success and security. He was charming, ambitious, everything my parents had taught me to look for in a husband. When he proposed at the end of my junior year, I said yes. She paused, seeming to gather herself before continuing. David didn't understand music. He thought it was a nice hobby, but not something serious people built their lives around. He wanted a wife who would support his career, raise his children, create the kind of home that would help him climb the corporate ladder. Billy could see where the story was heading, but he remained silent, allowing Rose to tell it at her own pace. I convinced myself that love meant compromise, that I could have both, be the wife David needed and still pursue music on the side. So I dropped out after my junior year, we got married, and I spent the next 23 years trying to be the woman he wanted me to be. The bitterness in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Billy recognized it as the sound of dreams deferred becoming dreams denied. We had 2 children, Michael and Sarah, beautiful kids, and I don't regret them for a second. But between raising them and supporting David's career, music became something I used to do rather than something I was. The piano gathered dust, then got moved to the basement, then finally got sold to pay for Michael's dental work. Rose's fingers had never stopped their invisible playing, and Billy found himself unconsciously following the melody she seemed to be hearing in her mind. David's business took off about 10 years ago. He started traveling more, working longer hours. At first, I thought it was just the pressure of success, but then she shrugged, the gesture conveying more than words could. I found out about the affair 3 years ago. Turns out he'd been seeing his secretary for almost 2 years. I'm sorry, Billy said, and meant it. The funny thing is, I wasn't even surprised. We'd been living like strangers for so long that it almost felt inevitable. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago. David kept the house and most of the assets. Apparently, I wasn't entitled to much since I hadn't been contributing financially to the marriage. The irony in her voice was sharp as a blade. Billy had seen enough of the world to know that people like Rose often got the short end of the stick when marriages fell apart, especially when they had sacrificed their own careers for their families. So here I am, Rose continued, 52 years old, living in a studio apartment above the hardware store, waiting tables to pay rent and hoping my kids will still take my calls when they're not too busy with their own lives. The story hung between them like morning mist. Heavy with regret and missed opportunities, Billy found himself thinking of all the Roses he had encountered over the years, people whose talents had been buried beneath the weight of responsibility and circumstance. "What kind of music did you write?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise Rose again. "You really want to know?" "I really want to know." Rose's expression softened, and for a moment Billy could see the young woman she had been, the one with dreams and melodies flowing through her heart like spring water. "I wrote stories, I suppose. Songs about ordinary people and the extraordinary things that happened to them when no one was looking. About the woman who watered her neighbor's flowers every morning for 20 years without being asked. About the man who left encouraging notes in library books for strangers to find. About the ways people carry love and loss and hope through their daily lives." Billy felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the recognition of a kindred spirit. This was what music was supposed to be about. Not fame or fortune, but the simple, profound act of translating human experience into melody and meaning. "Do you remember any of them?" Rose looked around the empty diner, then back at Billy. "I remember all of them. That's the thing about songs. Once they're in your head, they never really leave. Would you..." Billy paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you mind humming one? Just a few bars?" Rose's cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, I couldn't. I mean, my voice isn't what it used to be, and it's been so long." "Please," Billy said simply. "I'd really like to hear it." There was something in his tone that convinced her. Rose glanced around once more to make sure they were still alone, then closed her eyes and began to hum, very softly, a melody that seemed to capture all the longing and beauty and sorrow of her story. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, complex enough to be sophisticated, simple enough to be universal. Billy felt goosebumps rise on his arms as Rose's voice, rusty from disuse but still pure at its core, filled the small space between them. When she finished, she opened her eyes and found Billy staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "Rose, that was extraordinary." She laughed, but it was a self-deprecating sound. "You're very kind, but I'm sure you're just being polite." Billy leaned forward, his expression intense. "I'm not being polite. That melody, where did it come from?" "I wrote it about my mother," Rose said quietly. "After she died 5 years ago. It's called Letters to Heaven, about all the things I wished I had told her while she was still here to listen." Billy felt something shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. This wasn't just a sad story about lost dreams. This was something more, a genuine talent that had been hidden away like a treasure in a locked chest, waiting for someone to discover it. "Rose," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him expectantly, and Billy realized he had reached a crossroads. He could finish his coffee, pay his check, and walk away, leaving Rose to her life of quiet desperation. Or he could take a risk, not just for her, but for himself and for the music that had just moved him more deeply than anything he had heard in years. "My name is Billy Joel." Rose stared at him for a long moment, her expression uncomprehending. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in her eyes. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she shook her head in disbelief. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not... You can't be..." Billy reached into his wallet and pulled out his driver's license, sliding it across the table. Rose picked it up with trembling hands, studying the photograph and the name printed in official lettering. "William Martin Joel," she read aloud, her voice barely audible. She looked up at him, then back at the license, then back at him again. "You're really... Oh my God, you're really Billy Joel." Billy nodded, watching as Rose processed this information. He had revealed his identity countless times over the years, but it never got easier. There was always that moment of shock, followed by the inevitable shift in how people saw him and treated him. "I don't understand," Rose said, setting the license back on the table. "Why are you here, in Millbrook, in this diner? Why are you telling me this?" "I was driving back from a meeting in Albany," Billy explained. "I like taking the back road sometimes, stopping in places where I can just be anonymous for a while. I came in here for coffee and a quiet meal." "But you're Billy Joel," Rose repeated, as if saying it would make it feel more real. "You've sold millions of records. You've played Madison Square Garden more times than anyone in history. You're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame." Billy smiled at her incredulity. "And you're Rose, a woman who writes songs that could make angels weep. What's your point?" Rose shook her head, overwhelmed. "My point is that you don't just sit in small-town diners listening to waitresses hum their forgotten songs. This doesn't happen. Things like this don't happen to people like me." "What do you mean, people like you?" "You know what I mean." Rose's voice carried the weight of years of disappointment. People who made the wrong choices. People who let their dreams die. People who end up waiting tables at 52 because they were too naive to protect themselves. Billy was quiet for a long moment, studying Rose's face. He saw pain there and resignation, but also something else. A flicker of the fire that had once driven her to write songs about ordinary people and their extraordinary moments. "Rose," he said finally, "can I tell you something?" She nodded, still looking shell-shocked by his revelation. "I almost quit music 3 times. Once in 1973, when I was playing piano bars and my first album had completely flopped. Once in 1982, when the critics were tearing me apart and I was convinced I was a fraud who'd just gotten lucky. And once in 1993, when I went through my divorce and felt like everything I touched turned to ash." Rose listened intently, trying to reconcile this vulnerable confession with her image of the successful superstar sitting across from her. Each time, I was saved by a song. Not one of mine, someone else's. A melody or a lyric that reminded me why music mattered, why it was worth fighting for, even when everything else was falling apart. Billy paused, meeting Rose's eyes directly. That melody you just hummed, that's the song that's going to save me this time. Rose stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Billy's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Rose, I've been writing music for over 50 years. I've heard thousands of melodies, worked with the best songwriters in the business, and I'm telling you, what you just shared with me is something special, something rare. Tears were beginning to form in Rose's eyes, but she shook her head stubbornly. You're just being kind. That's who you are. I can see it. You're the kind of person who tries to make other people feel better about themselves. You're right, Billy admitted. I do try to be kind, but I'm also a professional musician, Rose. Kindness doesn't make me lie about music. If your song was mediocre, I would have complimented you politely and moved on. But what I just heard wasn't mediocre. It was extraordinary. The tears were flowing freely now, and Rose wiped them away with the back of her hand. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what does it matter? I'm 52 years old. I haven't written a complete song in 15 years. I don't have connections or agents or any of the things you need to make it in the music business. You have something better than all of that, Billy said quietly. You have stories to tell, real stories, about real people that come from a real place. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Rose was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with emotions she had buried for so long that feeling them again was almost physically painful. What are you saying? She asked finally. Billy took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would change both of their lives in ways he couldn't fully predict. I'm saying I want to help you. I want to hear your other songs, the ones you've been carrying around in your heart all these years. I want to help you record them, produce them, get them heard by the people who need to hear them. Rose shook her head again, but less certainly this time. That's impossible. I can't just... I have responsibilities. This job, my apartment, my routine. What if you didn't have to choose? Billy asked. What if we could find a way to do both? Before Rose could respond, the bell above the diner's front door chimed, and a family of 4 entered, shaking off rain and looking around for a place to sit. Rose automatically started to rise, the ingrained reflexes of customer service kicking in, despite the profound conversation she was having. Rose, Billy said quietly, stopping her with a gentle hand on her arm. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. She settled back into her seat, though her eyes kept drifting toward the family that had just entered. If you could have one thing, anything in the world, what would it be? Rose looked at him, as if the question itself were foreign to her. I don't really think about things like that anymore. Try, Billy encouraged. Just for a moment, forget about all the reasons why something might not be possible. What would you want? Rose was quiet for a long time, her gaze turning inward. Billy could see her struggling with the unfamiliar act of imagining a different life for herself. I would want to matter, she said finally, her voice so soft he had to lean forward to hear her. I would want to leave something behind that mattered. A song that helped someone through a difficult time, or made them feel less alone, or reminded them that their story was worth telling. Billy felt his heart constrict with recognition and admiration. This was what true artistry looked like. Not the desire for fame or wealth, but the need to connect, to contribute something meaningful to the human experience. Rose, he said, that's exactly what your music could do. That's what it's already doing, just by existing. The family at the front of the diner was beginning to look around impatiently for service. Rose noticed and started to rise again, but Billy caught her attention once more. Take care of your customers, he said. I'll wait right here. But when you're done, I want to make you an offer. A real offer, not just empty encouragement from a well-meaning stranger. Rose nodded, wiping her eyes once more and smoothing down her uniform. As she walked toward the waiting family, Billy could see her pulling herself together, reassembling the professional facade that had gotten her through countless difficult days. He watched her work, noting the grace and efficiency with which she moved, despite the emotional upheaval of their conversation. She took the family's order with genuine warmth, made small talk with their children about the rain, and somehow managed to make them feel welcome and cared for, despite everything else that was happening in her world. It was, Billy realized, another form of artistry, the ability to set aside your own pain and focus entirely on serving others, to find dignity and purpose in work that others might dismiss as menial. These were not small things. They were the qualities that separated truly good people from the rest of the world. When Rose returned to his table 20 minutes later, she looked calmer, but also more guarded. The initial shock of discovering his identity had worn off, and Billy could see her natural caution reasserting itself. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, settling back into the booth across from him. "And I appreciate it, I really do. But I think maybe you got caught up in the moment. I mean, you heard one melody hummed by a middle-aged waitress in a small-town diner. That's not exactly the foundation for a music career." Billy smiled. "You're probably right to be skeptical. If I were in your position, I'd be thinking the same thing. So let me be more specific about what I'm proposing." Rose folded her hands on the table, assuming the posture of someone preparing to listen politely to an offer she had already decided to decline. "I have a recording studio at my home on Long Island," Billy began. "It's fully equipped, professional grade, but it's private. No record company executives, no pressure, no deadlines. I want to invite you to spend a weekend there recording your songs. All of them. The ones you remember, the ones you've written in your head but never put on paper, even fragments and ideas that aren't fully formed yet." Rose opened her mouth to object, but Billy held up a hand to stop her. "I'll pay for your travel, put you up in a comfortable hotel nearby, and cover your lost wages from the diner for however long you're away. You don't have to commit to anything beyond that. If you get there and decide this whole thing is crazy, you can walk away with no hard feelings. But if the songs are as good as I think they are..." He paused, letting the possibility hang in the air between them. "If they're as good as I think they are, we'll talk about next steps. Maybe we record a full album. Maybe we find you a publisher for your songs so other artists can record them. Maybe we do something completely different that neither of us has thought of yet." Rose was shaking her head slowly throughout his proposal. "Billy, can I call you Billy? This is incredibly generous, but I can't accept it. I don't even know you. You don't know me. This is all happening too fast." "You're right," Billy agreed. "We don't really know each other. But I know your music, Rose, and your music tells me everything I need to know about who you are." He leaned back in the booth, studying her face. "Let me tell you what I heard in that melody. I heard someone who has paid attention to the world around her, who has noticed the small moments that most people miss. I heard someone who has experienced loss without becoming bitter, who has been hurt without losing her capacity for compassion. I heard someone who understands that the most profound truths are often found in the simplest experiences." Rose's eyes were beginning to fill with tears again, but Billy continued. "Most importantly, I heard someone who has something to say. Not just about herself, but about all of us, about what it means to be human in a world that often seems designed to crush the human spirit." He reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "Rose, I've spent my entire career trying to write songs that connect with people, that help them feel less alone in the world. What you hummed to me in those 30 seconds accomplished more of that than most songs I've heard in the past 10 years. Rose pulled her hand away, not unkindly, but with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust good things that seemed too easy. "Even if you're right about the music," she said, "and I'm not saying you are, there are practical considerations. I can't just abandon my job and my responsibilities on the word of someone I met an hour ago, even if that someone is Billy Joel. I understand, Billy said, and I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm asking you to take a chance on yourself. One weekend, Rose. What's the worst that could happen? Rose was quiet for a long time, and Billy could practically see the internal debate playing out behind her eyes. Hope warring with caution, dreams battling with the hard-learned lessons of disappointment. What's the best that could happen? She asked finally. Billy smiled. The best that could happen is that we create something beautiful together, something that matters, something that proves your parents were right when they said music was the one thing that could never be taken away from you. The reference to her parents seemed to hit home. Rose's expression softened, and for the first time since their conversation began, Billy saw her defenses truly lowering. I would need to give the diner 2 weeks' notice, she said slowly. I can't just leave Pete in the lurch. He's been good to me. Billy felt a surge of excitement but kept his voice calm. Of course, 2 weeks is fine. That gives us time to plan properly. And I would want to hear some of your music first, Rose continued. Not the hits everyone knows, but your songs, the ones that matter to you personally. If we're going to work together, I need to understand who you are as an artist. That seems fair, Billy agreed. I could play for you right now if you want. Is there a piano anywhere around here? Rose glanced around the diner, then toward the kitchen. Pete has an old upright in the back office. He used to play jazz back in the day, but I don't think... Would you ask him? Rose hesitated for a moment, then called toward the kitchen. Pete, could you come out here for a minute? A man in his 60s emerged from behind the grill, wiping his hands on his apron. He was tall and thin, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life fully lived. His eyes were sharp and curious as they took in Billy and Rose sitting together in the booth. What's up, Rosie? These folks giving you trouble? Billy stood and extended his hand. Pete, I'm Billy. I was wondering if I could ask you a favor. Pete looked at Billy's outstretched hand, then at Rose, who was watching the interaction with obvious anxiety. What kind of favor? Rose tells me you have a piano in the back. I'd like to play something for her, if that would be all right with you. Pete's eyes narrowed slightly. You a piano player? I try to be. Something in Billy's tone must have convinced Pete, because he nodded slowly. Piano's in my office, but she's old and hasn't been tuned in probably 5 years. Probably sounds like hell. That's okay, Billy said. I just need something with 88 keys. Pete studied Billy for another moment, then shrugged. All right, come on back. But if you break anything, you're paying for it. As they walked toward the back of the diner, Pete leaned close to Rose and whispered, You sure about this, Rosie? This guy seems a little too smooth for his own good. Rose looked at Pete with genuine affection. He had hired her when she was desperate, treated her with respect when others hadn't, and protected her from the occasional problem customer. She trusted his instincts about people. It's okay, Pete, she said quietly. I think he might be someone special. Pete's office was cramped and cluttered, filled with invoices, supplier catalogs, and the accumulated paperwork of running a small business. In one corner sat an old upright piano, its wooden case scarred and its ivory keys yellowed with age. Billy approached it reverently, running his fingers along the fallboard before lifting it to reveal the keyboard. She belonged to my first wife, Pete explained, his voice taking on a distant quality. Martha played beautifully. Used to fill the whole diner with music on slow Sunday afternoons. Billy pressed a few keys experimentally. Pete was right. The piano was desperately out of tune, with several keys producing sounds that were more percussion than melody. But there was something appealing about its imperfection, something honest and unpretentious. Would it be all right if Rose and I spent a few minutes back here? Billy asked. I promise we won't disturb anything. Pete looked at Rose again, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I suppose that would be okay. I'll be out front if you need anything. When Pete had left, Billy settled onto the small bench in front of the piano. Rose remained standing near the door, as if ready to flee at the first sign of danger. "What would you like to hear?" Billy asked. "Something that matters to you," Rose said, echoing her earlier request. Billy thought for a moment, his fingers finding their way across the unfamiliar keyboard. Then he began to play, his touch gentle and sure despite the piano's limitations. The melody that emerged was beautiful and melancholy, filled with the kind of emotional complexity that can only come from a lifetime of experience. Even through the piano's imperfect tuning, the song's power was undeniable. Billy's voice, when he began to sing, was rougher than on his recordings, but somehow more intimate, more personal. I've loved these days when we would sit and talk. In the cafe where the music played, I've tried to tell you how I really feel, but the words keep getting in the way. Rose felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't one of Billy's famous songs. It was something she had never heard before, something raw and unpolished and heartbreakingly honest. "And if I could find the words to say what's been living in my heart, I would tell you that you saved my life just by being who you are." The song continued for several more verses, each one revealing another layer of vulnerability and truth. When Billy finished, the silence that followed was profound, filled with the kind of understanding that exists between artists who recognize something essential in each other's work. "That was," Rose began, then stopped, unable to find adequate words. "Something I wrote last night," Billy said quietly, "after my manager told me he thought I should retire, that maybe it was time to accept that my best days were behind me." Rose moved closer to the piano, drawn by the honesty in his voice. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." Billy's fingers continued to move across the keys, picking out a gentle melody. "I've been thinking about it for 3 months now, actually. Whether there's any point in continuing to make music in a world that seems increasingly interested in younger voices and newer sounds." "And what have you decided?" Billy looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the same uncertainty she had seen in her own mirror so many times. "Until an hour ago, I was pretty sure I was done. That maybe it was time to step aside gracefully and let someone else have a turn." "What changed?" "You did." Durit, the simplicity of his answer carried more weight than any elaborate explanation could have. "Hearing your melody reminded me why I started making music in the first place. It wasn't about fame or success or proving anything to anyone. It was about connecting with people, about finding ways to express the things that are too big or too complex or too important for ordinary words." Rose felt tears starting again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of recognition, of finally hearing someone else voice the feelings she had carried alone for so long. "Billy," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He stopped playing and gave her his full attention. "I've been lying to myself for 15 years, Rose continued. Telling myself that I was satisfied with the life I had chosen, that I didn't miss music, that I had moved on to more important things. But the truth is, there hasn't been a single day when I haven't thought about the songs I wanted to write, the melodies that play in my head when I'm falling asleep at night." She moved to the small chair beside Pete's desk, sitting down as if the weight of her confession required physical support. "When I hummed that melody for you, it was the first time in years that I've shared my music with another person. And when you responded to it the way you did," she paused, searching for words. "It felt like coming back to life after being dead for a very long time." Billy continued to play softly as she spoke, his music providing a gentle soundtrack to her revelations. "The thing is," Rose went on, "I'm scared. I'm 52 years old, and I've been playing it safe for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to take risks. What if I come to your studio and discover that I've been fooling myself? What if the songs I've been carrying around aren't as good as I think they are? What if I'm just a middle-aged woman with delusions of grandeur?" Billy stopped playing and turned to face her fully. "Rose, can I tell you about the worst review I ever received?" She nodded, curious about where he was going with this. "It was 1977, right after The Stranger was released. A critic for Rolling Stone wrote that my music was hopelessly middle class and suburban, that I was the musical equivalent of white bread, and that I represented everything that was wrong with American popular music. Rose winced at the cruelty of the assessment. I was devastated, Billy continued. I spent weeks wondering if he was right, if everything I had worked for was just a facade covering up my fundamental mediocrity as an artist. What did you do? I kept writing songs, not because I was sure they were good, but because I couldn't stop writing them, because the need to express what was inside me was stronger than my fear of being criticized or rejected. Billy stood and walked to the small window that looked out on the diner's parking lot. That album went on to become one of the best-selling records of all time, but even if it had been a complete failure, I still would have been glad I made it. Because the alternative, not making it, not trying, not risking failure, would have been a different kind of death. He turned back to Rose, his expression serious but kind. You asked, what if the songs aren't as good as you think they are? I'll ask you this. What if they're better? What if you have something inside you that the world needs to hear? Are you really willing to take that secret to your grave just because you're afraid of being disappointed? Rose sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing his words. Outside, she could hear the familiar sounds of the diner. Pete moving around the kitchen, the coffee machine gurgling, the distant murmur of conversation from the dining room. These were the sounds that had surrounded her for the past 3 years, the soundtrack to a life of quiet resignation. I keep thinking about my mother, she said finally. She used to tell me that regret was the heaviest burden a person could carry, that it was better to fail at something you cared about than to succeed at something that didn't matter to you. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Rose smiled, the expression transforming her face. She would have liked you, I think. She always said she could judge a person's character by how they treated service workers and whether they understood that music was a language of the heart. Billy laughed. Well, I hope I pass on both counts. You do. Rose's voice carried a note of decision that hadn't been there before. Billy, I want to accept your offer, not because I think it will lead to fame or fortune. I'm too old and too realistic for that kind of fantasy, but because I want to honor the part of myself that I've been ignoring for too long. Billy felt a surge of excitement and relief. Are you sure? I'm terrified, Rose admitted. But yes, I'm sure. I owe it to myself and to my parents' memory and to all the songs that have been waiting patiently inside me for their chance to be heard. Billy returned to the piano and began playing a gentle, celebratory melody. Then let's start planning. I'll give you my contact information and we'll work out the details. 2 weeks from today, you'll be in my studio, recording the songs you were meant to write. Rose stood and moved closer to the piano, drawn by the music and by the sense of possibility that suddenly seemed to fill the small office. Can I ask you something? Anything. Will you teach me some of your songs? I mean, would you be willing to share the stories behind them? If we're going to work together, I want to understand your process, your approach to songwriting. Billy's hands stilled on the keys. Rose, that might be the most flattering request anyone has ever made of me. Over the next hour, Billy played song after song, sharing the stories and emotions that had inspired each one. He told Rose about writing Piano Man based on his experiences playing in a Los Angeles bar, about the personal struggles that had led to Just the Way You Are, about the complex relationship with his hometown that had produced New York State of Mind. With each song, Rose felt herself understanding more about the craft of songwriting, about the way personal experience could be transformed into universal truth through melody and lyric. But more than that, she felt herself remembering who she had been before life had convinced her to settle for less than her dreams. As Billy played, Rose found herself humming along, adding harmonies that seemed to emerge naturally from some deep well of musical instinct. Their voices blended together with surprising ease, creating something that was richer and more complex than either could produce alone. "My God," Billy said, stopping in the middle of the longest time. "Rose, do you realize what just happened?" She looked at him questioningly. "We just created an arrangement that's better than anything I've done with professional backup singers. That harmony line you added, where did that come from?" Rose blushed. "I don't know. It just felt right." Billy shook his head in amazement. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You have an instinct for music that can't be taught. It can only be nurtured and developed." Their musical session was interrupted by Pete, who appeared in the doorway looking somewhat bemused. "Sorry to break up the concert, but we're getting busy out here, and Rose has tables waiting." Rose glanced at her watch and was shocked to see that nearly 2 hours had passed. "Oh my God, Pete, I'm so sorry. I completely lost track of time." "Don't worry about it," Pete said, but Billy could see him studying the scene with obvious curiosity. "Just thought you should know." As Rose prepared to return to her waitressing duties, Billy caught her hand. "Before you go, I need your phone number and address, and you need mine." They quickly exchanged information, and Billy pressed a business card into her palm. "That has my personal cell phone number on it," he said. "Don't give it to anyone else, but call me anytime, day or night, if you have questions or concerns, or if you just need to talk through any part of this." Rose nodded, tucking the card carefully into her apron pocket. "Billy, I still can't quite believe this is really happening." "It's happening," he assured her. 2 weeks from today, you'll be making music again. Real music, the way you were meant to." As Rose returned to the dining room to take care of her customers, Billy remained at the piano for a few more minutes, playing softly and thinking about the extraordinary turn his day had taken. He had come to this small-town diner looking for nothing more than a quiet meal and a brief respite from the pressures of his career. Instead, he had found something far more valuable, a reminder of why music mattered, and a fellow artist whose talent deserved to be shared with the world. When he finally emerged from Pete's office, he found Rose busy with a table of senior citizens who were debating the merits of different pie options. She caught his eye and smiled. Not the professional smile she had been wearing when he first arrived, but something genuine and radiant that seemed to light up the entire room. Billy settled back into his original booth and signaled for his check. When Rose brought it over, along with a slice of apple pie he hadn't ordered, she sat down across from him one more time. "Pete says the pie is on the house," she explained. "He's curious about you, but he's too polite to ask direct questions." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're a musician who's going to help me record some songs I've written." Billy smiled at her careful phrasing. "And what did he say to that?" "He said it was about damn time." Rose laughed. "Apparently he's been listening to me hum while I worked for 3 years, waiting for me to do something about it." As Billy ate his pie, which was, he had to admit, exceptional, Rose continued to work, but there was something different about her now. She moved with more energy, smiled more readily, and seemed to glow with an inner light that hadn't been there when he first walked in. When he was ready to leave, Billy left a generous tip and stood to go. Rose walked him to the door, and they stood for a moment in the entrance, rain still pattering against the windows. "Thank you," Rose said quietly. "I don't just mean for the opportunity, although that means everything to me. I mean for seeing something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself." "Thank you," Billy replied, "for reminding me why I became a musician in the first place." They shook hands formally, but there was nothing formal about the understanding that passed between them. This was the beginning of something important, not just for their individual careers, but for the music they would create together. As Billy walked to his car, he turned back to see Rose watching him through the diner window. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he could see that she was crying again. But this time, he was certain they were tears of joy. The drive back to Long Island gave Billy plenty of time to think about what had just transpired. He had made similar offers to young artists before, had mentored and supported dozens of up-and-coming musicians over the years. But this felt different. This felt like destiny. By the time he reached his home studio, Billy was already making plans. He would need to clear his schedule for the next month, arrange for the best possible recording equipment, and think carefully about which of his industry contacts might be interested in hearing Rose's material. But first, he had some music to write. The afternoon with Rose had filled his head with melodies and possibilities, and he felt more creatively energized than he had in years. He sat down at his piano, a beautiful Steinway Grand that was perfectly tuned and maintained, and began to play. The song that emerged was unlike anything he had written before. It was about second chances and hidden talents, about the way life could surprise you just when you thought you had it all figured out. It was about a waitress in a small-town diner who carried symphonies in her heart, and about the way one conversation could change two lives forever. As he played, Billy found himself thinking about Rose's melody, the one she had called Letters to Heaven. He could hear it clearly in his memory, and he understood instinctively how it could be developed and arranged. More than that, he could hear how it would sound when sung by someone who truly understood its emotional weight. 2 weeks later, Rose arrived at Billy's Long Island studio carrying a small suitcase and a notebook filled with songs she had written over the course of her sleepless nights since their meeting. She was nervous but determined, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes and carrying herself with a dignity that spoke of inner strength rather than outer confidence. Billy met her at the door personally, and Rose was struck by how different he seemed in his own environment. This was clearly a man who was comfortable with success, surrounded by the tools and toys of a lifetime spent making music. But there was nothing ostentatious or intimidating about the space. It felt warm and welcoming, like a home rather than a business. "How are you feeling?" Billy asked as he showed her around the studio. "Like I'm about to jump off a cliff," Rose admitted, "but also like I might actually be able to fly." Billy laughed. "That's exactly how you should feel. Come on, let me show you where we'll be working." The recording studio was everything Rose had imagined, and more. The walls were lined with acoustic panels, and the centerpiece was a magnificent grand piano that seemed to glow under the warm studio lights. There were microphones and recording equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything she had ever seen. But Billy explained each piece with patience and enthusiasm. "The most important thing to remember," he said, settling down at the piano bench, "is that all of this technology is just in service of the music. The song is what matters. Everything else is just there to help us capture it in the best possible way." Rose sat down in a comfortable chair beside the piano, her notebook clutched in her hands. "Where do we start?" "With the song that brought us together," Billy said. "Play me Letters to Heaven again, but this time I want you to tell me the whole story, every verse, every bridge, everything you've been carrying around in your heart." What followed was one of the most extraordinary recording sessions of Billy's career. Rose's song was even more beautiful, fully developed than it had been in its hummed fragment, filled with imagery and emotion that spoke to the universal experience of loss and love, and the complicated relationship between parents and children. As they worked through the arrangement, Billy found himself marveling at Rose's musical instincts. She understood intuitively how to layer harmonies, when to pull back and let the melody breathe, and how to use silence as effectively as sound. Most remarkably, she seemed to have no ego about the process. She was open to suggestions, willing to experiment, and focused entirely on serving the song rather than showcasing her own abilities. By the end of the first day, they had recorded rough versions of 3 songs, each one revealing new depths of Rose's talent. Billy went to bed that night, feeling more excited about music than he had in years, already planning how they would spend their remaining studio time. The second day brought even greater revelations. Rose's song about the woman who watered her neighbor's flowers, called Unsung Saints, proved to have a melody that was both haunting and uplifting. with lyrics that celebrated the quiet heroism of everyday kindness. Her song about library notes, messages between the lines, was a perfect blend of whimsy and profundity, turning a simple act of anonymous encouragement into a meditation on human connection. But it was her final song of the weekend that truly took Billy's breath away. Called The Waitress and the Piano Man, it was Rose's musical reflection on their meeting and the way unexpected encounters could change everything. The melody was complex and sophisticated, the lyrics were both personal and universal, and Rose's performance was filled with a vulnerability and strength that moved Billy to tears. "Rose," he said when she finished, "that's not just a good song, that's a great song. That's the kind of song that defines careers and changes lives." Rose looked at him with wonder and disbelief. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." Billy's voice carried absolute conviction, "and I think I know exactly what we need to do with it." Over the following months, Billy used every connection he had built during his decades in the music industry to ensure that Rose's songs received the attention they deserved. He arranged for her to perform at small, intimate venues where her music could be heard and appreciated by industry professionals. He introduced her to producers and publishers who understood the value of authentic songwriting. Most importantly, he continued to work with her as a collaborator and mentor, helping her develop her craft while never losing sight of what made her voice unique. The breakthrough came 6 months after their first recording session. The Waitress and the Piano Man was featured on a popular radio program that specialized in introducing listeners to new artists, and the response was overwhelming. Within hours of the broadcast, Billy's phone was ringing with calls from record labels, booking agents, and music journalists who wanted to know more about the mysterious songwriter who had created such a powerful piece of music. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from ordinary listeners. People who called or wrote to say that Rose's song had moved them, inspired them, or simply made them feel less alone in the world. These were the responses that mattered most to both Rose and Billy, the proof that music could still serve its highest purpose of connecting human hearts across all barriers of age, circumstance, and experience. A year after their meeting in Murphy's Diner, Rose released her first album, simply titled Letters to Heaven. The record was a critical and commercial success, praised for its emotional honesty and musical sophistication. But more than that, it established Rose as an important new voice in American music, someone who could write about the experiences of ordinary people with extraordinary insight and compassion. The album's success led to touring opportunities, television appearances, and collaborations with other respected artists. Rose handled it all with the same grace and dignity she had shown in the diner, never losing sight of the fact that her music was a gift to be shared rather than a commodity to be exploited. Billy continued to play an important role in Rose's career, both as a collaborator and as a friend. Their partnership proved to be creatively fulfilling for both of them, leading to a joint album that showcased their complementary strengths and shared understanding of music's power to heal and inspire. But perhaps the most lasting impact of their meeting was personal rather than professional. For Rose, the opportunity to share her music with the world represented the fulfillment of dreams she had thought were lost forever. More importantly, it proved to her that it was never too late to reclaim the essential parts of yourself that you might have set aside in service of other responsibilities. For Billy, working with Rose renewed his sense of purpose and reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Her example of perseverance and authenticity inspired him to continue creating, to keep pushing the boundaries of his own artistry rather than simply resting on his considerable laurels. 5 years after their first meeting, Billy and Rose performed together at Carnegie Hall in a concert that was filmed and later released as a documentary called The Waitress and the Piano Man, a story of second chances. The film told the story of their unlikely partnership and its impact on both of their lives, but it also served as inspiration for anyone who had ever felt that their dreams were impossible or their talents were insufficient. In the documentary, Pete from Murphy's Diner was interviewed about the day everything changed. "I knew something special was happening when I heard them playing together in my office," he said, grinning at the camera. "But I never imagined it would lead to all this. Just goes to show you never know what's going to walk through your door." The documentary ended with Billy and Rose performing Letters to Heaven together, their voices blending in perfect harmony as images of ordinary people going about their daily lives played on the screen behind them. It was a reminder that everyone has a story worth telling, that everyone carries music in their heart, and that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything. As the final notes faded and the audience erupted in applause, Rose looked out at the sea of faces and thought about how different her life had become since that rainy October day when a stranger had walked into her diner and asked her to hum a melody. She thought about her parents, who had taught her that music was something that could never be taken away, and she knew they would be proud of what she had accomplished. But more than pride, she felt gratitude for the unexpected turns that life could take, for the kindness of strangers who became friends, and for the reminder that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. In the end, the story of the waitress and the piano man became more than just a tale of musical success. It became a testament to the power of human connection, the importance of nurturing hidden talents, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the most extraordinary things can emerge from the most ordinary moments. Never underestimate a kind heart. Never dismiss the dreams that others carry quietly within them, and never forget that the person sitting across from you in a small-town diner might just be carrying the song that will change your life forever. The magic of music lies not just in the melodies we hear, but in the courage to share them with the world. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen, really listen, to transform two lives and countless others in the process. Remember to like this video if Rose's story touched your heart, subscribe for more inspiring true stories, and tell us in the comments about a time when an unexpected encounter changed your life forever.